HOA President Eleanor shot Sheriff Marcus's disabled daughter just for sitting in her wheelchair. Eleanor thought she was powerful and would face no consequences. She didn't know this one cruel act would destroy her life and send her to prison for 12 years. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. The summer heat pressed down on Oakwood Heights like a suffocating blanket as Sheriff Marcus Blake pulled his cruiser into the driveway of his modest 2-story home. His shift had been grueling. 15 hours of back-to-back calls, a armed robbery at the convenience store, and mountains of paperwork that made his eyes blur. All he wanted was to kiss his wife, hug his daughter, and collapse into bed. But the moment he stepped out of his vehicle, he heard screaming. Not just any screaming. His daughter's voice, shrill with terror and pain, cutting through the afternoon air like broken glass. "Daddy! Daddy, please." Marcus's training evaporated in an instant, replaced by primal parental fear. He sprinted around the side of his house, his heart hammering against his ribs, his hand instinctively reaching for his service weapon. What he saw made his blood run cold. His 12-year-old daughter Sophie lay crumpled on the grass near the property line, her body convulsing with sobs. Her wheelchair had been knocked over beside her, one wheel still spinning slowly, and most horrifying of all, blood soaked through her white t-shirt, spreading across her stomach in a crimson stain that grew larger with each passing second. Sophie. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the damage. "Baby, what happened? Who did this?" Sophie's face was twisted in agony, tears streaming down her cheeks as she struggled to breathe through the pain. "Mrs. Whitmore," she gasped out. "The HOA lady. She shot me, Daddy, she shot me." Marcus gently lifted his daughter's shirt and felt his entire world tilt sideways. A pellet was embedded deep in Sophie's abdomen just below her ribcage. The wound bled steadily and the surrounding skin was already turning purple and swollen. For a child born with muscular dystrophy, whose body was already fragile and weakened, this injury could be catastrophic. "Where is she?" Marcus's voice came out as a growl, something dark and dangerous rising from deep within his chest. "She went back inside her house." Sophie whimpered, pointing weakly toward the large colonial at the end of the street. She said I deserved it, that I was ruining the neighborhood just by existing." Marcus pulled out his phone with trembling hands and called for an ambulance, then immediately radioed for backup. As he waited, he pressed his handkerchief against Sophie's wound, trying to stem the bleeding while his daughter cried in his arms. "I was just sitting in my wheelchair by the fence," Sophie sobbed. "I was reading my book. I wasn't doing anything wrong, Daddy." She came over and started yelling that my wheelchair was an eyesore, that disabled kids shouldn't be allowed in nice neighborhoods. When I told her to leave me alone, she pulled out a gun and just shot me. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore had been the HOA president for 8 years, and in that time, she'd made the Blake family's life miserable. Constant complaints about Sophie's wheelchair ramp being aesthetically displeasing. Fines for leaving medical equipment visible through windows. Nasty letters about how Sophie's presence at community events made other families uncomfortable. But this crossed every line that existed. The ambulance arrived within 4 minutes, paramedics rushing to stabilize Sophie for transport. Marcus climbed into the back with his daughter, holding her hand as they raced toward County General Hospital. His wife Rebecca met them there, having received his frantic call on her way home from work. Her scream when she saw Sophie's blood-soaked clothing echoed through the emergency room. "Who did this?" Rebecca demanded, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "Marcus, who hurt our baby?" "Eleanor Whitmore. She shot her with a pellet gun." Rebecca's face went white, then red with rage. "That woman? The HOA president who's been harassing us for years? She shot our daughter?" Before Marcus could respond, the doctors whisked Sophie away behind double doors marked surgical unit. A nurse gently guided Marcus and Rebecca to a private waiting room, explaining that the pellet had to be surgically removed and they needed to check for internal damage. The next 3 hours were the longest of Marcus Blake's life. He paced the small waiting room like a caged animal, his mind cycling between desperate prayers for his daughter's survival and vivid fantasies of what he wanted to do to Eleanor Whitmore. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, still wearing his surgical scrubs. "Sophie's going to be okay," he said, and both parents sagged with relief. "We removed the pellet. It missed her vital organs by less than an inch. She's incredibly lucky." "But Sheriff Blake, Mrs. Blake," The trauma to Sophie's system, given her muscular dystrophy, is significant. Her recovery will be long and painful. And psychologically, he paused, someone deliberately shot your disabled child. That's going to leave scars that medicine can't heal. Marcus thanked the doctor with a voice that didn't sound like his own, then excused himself and walked outside into the hospital parking lot. He stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, breathing in the night air, trying to master the rage that threatened to consume him entirely. His phone buzzed. Deputy Williams, one of his most trusted officers. "Sheriff, we arrested Eleanor Whitmore. She's in custody." "But, sir, you need to know what she said when we took her in." "What did she say?" "She said, and I quote, 'That crippled girl has been ruining our property values for years. I did what I had to do to protect our community. If the parents won't remove the problem, someone has to.' Sir, she has no remorse." "None at all." Marcus closed his eyes. "Charge her with assault with a deadly weapon on a minor, aggravated assault, and hate crime enhancement. Get a warrant and search her property for the weapon. Document everything. And Williams? Do it by the book. Perfect, no mistakes. I want this case airtight." "Yes, sir, Sheriff." "How's Sophie?" "She's alive. She's going to survive." Marcus's voice cracked. "But she'll never be the same." Over the next week, as Sophie lay in a hospital bed recovering from surgery, Marcus built the case against Eleanor Whitmore with methodical precision. He recused himself from direct involvement due to conflict of interest, but he worked closely with District Attorney Patricia Rodriguez to ensure every piece of evidence was documented and preserved. The evidence was damning. A security camera on the Blake's house had captured the entire incident, Eleanor Whitmore approaching Sophie in her wheelchair, the argument, and then Eleanor pulling a CO2-powered pellet pistol from her designer, person firing at point-blank range while Sophie sat, helpless and unable to escape. 3. Neighbors came forward as witnesses. Mrs. Chen, from across the street, testified that she'd seen Eleanor shoot Sophie, then stand over the wounded child and say, "Maybe now your parents will understand that freaks like you don't belong in civilized society." Mr. Patel from next door reported that Eleanor had complained to him multiple times about the Blake family, using slurs and derogatory language about Sophie's disability. She called Sophie defective merchandise and said that allowing disabled children in the neighborhood was like letting rats infest a nice restaurant. He told investigators, his face twisted with disgust, and most damning of all, when deputies searched Eleanor's home with a warrant, they found a journal. Page after page documented her hatred of Sophie and other disabled residents in the community. Entries included, "The Blake girl pollutes our neighborhood with her presence. Her wheelchair, her twisted limbs, her drooling face, it's disgusting. Property values drop every day she's visible. I've tried everything legal to force them out. The HOA rules aren't strong enough. More drastic measures may be necessary. Saw the cripple reading by the fence today. If she won't stay hidden inside where she belongs, perhaps a lesson in consequences is required." The final entry, dated the morning of the shooting, read, "Today I take action. The Blake girl has ignored my warnings long enough. A pellet gun leaves no permanent damage but delivers a clear message. You are not wanted here. Your kind does not belong among decent people." When Eleanor Whitmore was arraigned, she appeared in an expensive navy suit with her lawyer, an aggressive defense attorney named Richard Carmichael, who specialized in getting wealthy clients acquitted. She pled not guilty, looking annoyed rather than remorseful. "Your Honor, my client is a respected community leader who has dedicated years to maintaining property standards," Carmichael argued. "This incident has been blown entirely out of proportion by an overreaching sheriff who happens to be the alleged victim's father." Judge Maria Santos was not impressed. "Mr. Carmichael, your client shot a disabled 12-year-old child in the stomach with a pellet gun. That's not a property standards issue. Bail is set at $750,000. Trial is scheduled for 8 weeks from today." Eleanor's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, shock registering on her face. Then she turned to her lawyer and hissed, "Get me out of here. This is absurd. I'll have that judge removed." But Judge Santos had presided over the county court for 20 years and had a reputation for being unshakable. Eleanor's threats meant nothing. Sophie came home from the hospital after 6 days, but she wasn't the same girl who'd left. She refused to go outside. She had nightmares every night, waking up screaming that someone was shooting her again. She flinched at loud noises and burst into tears whenever she saw news coverage of the case. Worst of all, she'd started to internalize Eleanor's hatred. Marcus found her staring at herself in the mirror one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Mrs. Whitmore was right," Sophie whispered. "I am ugly. Look at me, Daddy, my legs don't work right. My arms are weak. I drool sometimes. I make weird sounds when I'm tired. She said I'm defective merchandise, and she's right. Maybe I should just stay inside forever so I don't bother people." Marcus felt his heart shatter. He knelt beside his daughter's wheelchair and took her face in his hands. "Sophie Elizabeth Blake, you listen to me. You are beautiful. You are perfect. You are the best thing that ever happened to your mother and me. Muscular dystrophy is just a part of your body. It's not who you are. Mrs. Whitmore is sick in her heart and her mind. Her hatred says nothing about you and everything about her own ugliness inside. But why does she hate me so much? What did I do?" "Nothing, baby. You did nothing. Some people are filled with so much poison that they can't see beauty or goodness in anyone different from themselves. That's her failure, not yours." But Marcus could see his words weren't enough. Eleanor Whitmore's bullet had pierced more than Sophie's flesh. It had wounded her spirit, her sense of self, her ability to feel safe in the world. And for that, Eleanor Whitmore would pay. The trial began on a gray October morning. The courtroom was packed with media, disability rights advocates, and community members. Marcus sat in the gallery with Rebecca, both dressed in formal clothes, both trying to project strength they didn't feel. Eleanor Whitmore sat at the defense table looking imperious and unworried, as if she expected this whole misunderstanding to be cleared up momentarily. District Attorney Rodriguez was thorough and relentless. She presented the security footage, which played on large screens for the jury. Watching Eleanor deliberately aim a weapon at a child in a wheelchair and pull the trigger made several jurors visibly upset. One woman covered her mouth in horror. The neighbor testimonies were powerful. Mrs. Chen described the shooting in vivid detail, her voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Patel recounted Eleanor's hateful comments about Sophie. A third neighbor, Dr. Ahmad, testified that Eleanor had tried to get him to sign a petition calling for medical facilities to house disabled residents instead of allowing them in residential zones. Then came the journal entries. As D.A. Rodriguez read them aloud, the courtroom fell silent except for her voice reciting Eleanor's venomous words. By the time she finished, several jurors were crying. The defense's strategy was predictable: paint Eleanor as stressed and overwhelmed, suggest the shooting was an accident or a warning shot gone wrong, and try to minimize the severity of a pellet gun injury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made a mistake," Carmichael told the jury in his opening statement. "She's a woman who has dedicated years to her community, trying to maintain standards and property values for everyone's benefit. Did she make a poor choice in that moment? Yes, but this was not attempted murder. This was not a hate crime. This was a regrettable incident born of frustration." But his case fell apart during Eleanor's own testimony. D.A. Rodriguez was brilliant in her cross-examination, letting Eleanor's own words condemn her. "Mrs. Whitmore, in your journal you wrote that Sophie Blake pollutes the neighborhood with her presence. Can you explain what you meant?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "I meant that having a severely disabled child visible in the neighborhood negatively impacts property values and quality of life for other residents." "So, Sophie's mere existence bothers you?" "Her visibility does. There are appropriate facilities for children with her condition. Forcing the rest of us to accommodate her needs and witness her condition is unfair. You believe disabled children should be institutionalized? I believe that children who cannot function normally should be in specialized settings, yes. Making everyone else adjust their lives and lower their standards to accommodate disabilities is unreasonable." D.A. Rodriguez let the words hang in the air. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe you did anything wrong when you shot Sophie Blake?" Eleanor hesitated, sensing danger but unable to help herself. "I regret the situation escalated to that point, but the Blake family has refused every reasonable request to minimize their daughter's public presence. They act as if her disability is something to parade around rather than manage discreetly. I was attempting to deliver a message that actions have consequences. By shooting a 12-year-old child? By using appropriate force to enforce community standards." The courtroom erupted. Judge Santos called for order, but the damage was catastrophic. Even Eleanor's own lawyer looked horrified. When Sophie testified, it was devastating. She rolled to the witness stand in her wheelchair, wearing a purple dress her grandmother had bought her. Looking small and vulnerable, de Rodriguez handled her gently, asking simple questions that Sophie answered in a quiet but clear voice. "Sophie, what were you doing when Mrs. Whitmore shot you?" "Reading. Just reading a book. It was about a girl who goes to Narnia. I like fantasy books because in those stories nobody cares if you're disabled." Several jurors wiped their eyes. "What did Mrs. Whitmore say to you before she shot you?" "She said I was ruining the neighborhood, that I was ugly and disgusting, that disabled people like me should be locked away so normal people don't have to look at us." Sophie's voice trembled. "She said my parents should be ashamed of me, that I was defective merchandise they should have returned." "What happened next?" "She pulled out a gun. I tried to wheel my chair away, but I'm not very fast. My arms get tired easily because of my muscular dystrophy." She pointed the gun right at my stomach and pulled the trigger. Tears rolled down Sophie's cheeks. It hurt so bad. I fell out of my chair. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. Sophie looked directly at Eleanor Whitmore, who stared back with cold contempt. "Why do you hate me so much? I never did anything to you. I was just trying to exist." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the stenographer was crying. Carmichael's cross-examination was brief and backfired spectacularly. Every question he asked made Eleanor look worse and Sophie more sympathetic. When he tried to suggest Sophie had been provocative in some way, de Rodriguez's objection was sustained immediately, and Judge Santos warned him against victim-blaming a disabled child. Closing arguments were powerful on both sides, but the evidence was overwhelming. De Rodriguez spoke directly to the jury. "Eleanor Whitmore shot Sophie Blake because Sophie is disabled. Not because Sophie did anything wrong. Not because Sophie posed any threat. But because in Eleanor Whitmore's world, disabled people don't deserve to exist in public. They don't deserve to read books in their own yards. They don't deserve to be visible or take up space or simply be." She pointed to where Sophie sat with her parents. "That child will carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of her life. She's afraid to go outside. She has nightmares." She started to believe the poison Eleanor Whitmore poured into her. That she's ugly, that she's defective, that she doesn't belong. A 12-year-old child has been taught to hate herself because an adult woman chose violence over compassion. Eleanor Whitmore is guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. She's guilty of a hate crime. And most of all, she's guilty of trying to destroy a child's spirit because that child had the audacity to be disabled in her neighborhood. The evidence is clear. The video doesn't lie. Eleanor Whitmore's own words in her journal and on this witness stand don't lie. She shot a helpless child and she'd do it again if given the chance. She's shown no remorse, no recognition that she did anything wrong. She still believes Sophie Blake doesn't deserve to exist in public. Find her guilty. Send the message that disabled children have the same right to exist, to be visible, to take up space as any other children. Send the message that hatred like Eleanor Whitmore's will not be tolerated in our community. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 17 minutes, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Eleanor Whitmore's face went white as paper. Her lawyer slumped in defeat. Rebecca Blake sobbed into Marcus's shoulder. Sophie, sitting in her wheelchair between them, whispered, "We won, Daddy. We actually won." Marcus pulled his daughter close, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, baby, we won." Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Santos had reviewed victim impact statements, psychological evaluations, and Eleanor's complete lack of remorse. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have presided over this court for 2 decades. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, and child abusers, but I have rarely seen the kind of cold, calculated hatred you displayed toward an innocent child. You didn't shoot Sophie Blake in a moment of passion or poor judgment. You targeted her over months, fantasized about hurting her, and then methodically carried out that plan. You shot a disabled 12-year-old who was reading a book in her own yard. And you did it because you view disabled people as subhuman creatures who don't deserve to exist in your presence." Judge Santos leaned forward, her expression stern. "Your complete lack of remorse, your continued insistence that you did nothing wrong, and your stated belief that disabled children should be institutionalized demonstrate that you pose an ongoing danger to vulnerable members of our community. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. You will serve a minimum of 10 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, you will pay $750,000 in restitution to the Blake family for medical expenses. Therapy, pain and suffering, and the lifelong trauma you've inflicted on their daughter. Eleanor stood up, face red with fury. 12 years? For a pellet gun?
This is insane.
I'll appeal. You may appeal, Mrs. Whitmore, though I doubt you'll succeed. The evidence against you was overwhelming, and your own testimony sealed your fate. Officers removed the defendant. As Eleanor Whitmore was led away in handcuffs, still protesting and threatening appeals, Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that balance had been restored to a universe that had tilted violently off its axis. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Marcus made a brief statement with Sophie beside him, her hand in his. This case was about more than one woman shooting one child. It was about whether disabled people have the same right to exist in public spaces as anyone else. It was about whether hatred and discrimination will be tolerated in our community. Today, the justice system said no. Disabled children deserve safety. They deserve dignity. They deserve to read books in their yards without fear of violence. Eleanor Whitmore tried to teach my daughter that she doesn't belong in the world. Instead, she taught her that the world will stand up and fight for her. A reporter called out, "Sheriff Blake, critics say you used your position to get special treatment." Marcus's expression hardened. I recused myself from this investigation. The district attorney prosecuted the case. The evidence spoke for itself. Video footage, witnesses, and Eleanor Whitmore's own words. This conviction happened because the crime was undeniable and the evidence was overwhelming. Any parent would have fought for their child. I just had to trust the system to do its job, and it did. The appeals were filed and denied. Eleanor Whitmore began serving her 12-year sentence at the Women's Correctional Facility, 200 miles away. Her husband divorced her within 6 months. Her friends abandoned her. The HOA elected a new president who immediately implemented anti-discrimination policies and issued a formal apology to the Blake family. But the real healing happened slowly, over months and years. Sophie worked with a trauma therapist twice a week. Gradually, painfully, she began to reclaim her sense of self. She started going outside again, first to the backyard, then the front yard, eventually to the park and the library and the places she used to love. She joined an online support group for young people with disabilities who'd experienced discrimination. She started writing poetry about her experiences, and slowly she began to believe again that she deserved to take up space in the world. 1 year after the shooting, on a warm summer afternoon, Marcus found Sophie in the front yard. She'd set up an easel and was painting, something she hadn't done since before the attack. The canvas showed a girl in a wheelchair with butterfly wings soaring above a beautiful landscape. "That's gorgeous, sweetheart." Sophie smiled up at him, and Marcus's heart swelled. It was her real smile, not the forced one she'd been wearing for months. "It's me. If I could fly, I'd fly everywhere. But I realized something, Daddy. Even without wings, I can still go anywhere I want. Mrs. Whitmore tried to make me believe I should hide, that I didn't belong in the world, but she was wrong. Yeah, she was. I'm going to be okay. Really okay. It still hurts sometimes, and I still have nightmares. But I'm not going to let her hate become my hate for myself. I'm disabled, and that's okay. I'm different, and that's okay. I'm me, and that's more than okay." Marcus knelt beside his daughter's wheelchair, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. You're the strongest person I know. I learned it from you and Mom. You taught me to fight. You taught me I matter." That evening, Marcus sat on the porch with Rebecca, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and pink. Their daughter was inside video chatting with friends, her laughter drifting through the open window. "She really is going to be okay," Rebecca said softly. "I know." Marcus squeezed his wife's hand. Eleanor Whitmore tried to break her. Instead, she made her stronger. "Do you think 12 years was enough?" Marcus considered the question. "I wanted life in prison when I first saw Sophie bleeding on the grass, but now I think the real justice is that Sophie survived and Eleanor lost everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her marriage, her community standing, all of it gone. And Sophie? Sophie's still here, still fighting, still claiming her right to exist in the world. That's the real victory." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. "You did good, Marcus. You got justice for our daughter without losing yourself in the process." "There were moments I wanted to," he admitted. "Moments where I wanted to forget I was a sheriff and just be a father seeking revenge. But you didn't." "No. Because Sophie needed me to show her that the system works, that justice is real, that she matters enough for the world to stand up and fight for her. Revenge would have been easy. Justice was harder but worth so much more. 5 years later, Sophie Blake graduated high school as valedictorian. She gave a speech about resilience, about fighting for disability rights, about refusing to let hatred define you. She was headed to college to study social work, determined to help other disabled young people who faced discrimination. Eleanor Whitmore was still in prison, having been denied early parole. Reports from the prison indicated she still showed no remorse, still believed she'd done nothing wrong, still harbored the same hateful views about disabled people. Some people never changed, but Sophie had changed, not by becoming someone different, but by fully becoming herself. Strong, compassionate, determined, and absolutely refusing to hide her disability or apologize for existing. Marcus Blake sat in the audience at graduation, tears streaming down his face as his daughter spoke to hundreds of people about her journey from victim to survivor, to advocate. This was real justice, not just punishing the person who'd hurt his child, but ensuring that his child thrived despite that hurt. The scar on Sophie's stomach would never fully fade. The emotional scars would always be there, surfacing during stress or triggered by unexpected reminders. But scars were proof of survival, evidence that something tried to destroy you and failed. Sophie Blake had survived. More than that, she'd transformed her pain into purpose and her trauma into triumph. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.